Up here in Sundown Bay, we hadn't been in there in quite a while. Our water levels were down for such a long time, so I kind of stay away from that sometimes when it's like that. But last week and a half, we've had a bull tide that's been here, so our water levels have been really high. So when that takes place, Sundown's one of the areas I like to target. So getting back here on the very end of it, had very mild winds all week. So it was very easy to fish and work, and with the extra water in there, so you really could spread yourself out across there. Some of it's a little bit deeper than we kind of anticipated, so we stayed off this back shoreline, maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 yards out from that. So you can fish 3 people pretty easy that way. You could stick a 4th in there, especially if you got somebody that's kind of tall, they can put them out there in the deeper water. So we did that on a couple of occasions, but just working this whole back shoreline. You got back lake mouths that dump out into Sundown. And if you fish back in there, you know exactly where I'm talking about. And, of course, we get down here a little bit closer to where the grass line kind of kicks in for us, which you got grass all up and down it, but some of it's a little bit better than others. Primarily looking for better trout. A lot of little ones were stacked in up and down this back shoreline, 12 to 15 inches. There's a bunch of those. But we found several. They're in that mid to upper slot, so 17s to 19s were pretty good. And of course, we have found redfish that are back in here. Redfish are grouping up, even getting bigger and bigger groups now as we're getting closer to October and getting ready for them to make that run. Of course, if you can kind of position yourself to where you can get into some cuts or some stuff that's close to the Gulf access, like Cedar Bayou, which is straight across from Mesquite Bay, you kind of set yourself up for some good opportunities. You may find you some small pods. You may find some bigger pods of redfish, which we found more small pods on this back shoreline here in Sundown. I think maybe the biggest group that we saw that was working down this back shoreline. They were crushing shrimp and crab that were up and down that grass. And they were, a lot of them with the grass or with the water being up so high, they were just pushed right up against the shoreline in that grass. So that was kind of the target area that we really worked. So as long as this water continues to stay where it is, and it's at some point it probably will fall out. We're in the middle of the backside of the new moon, which has been pretty good for us for the most part as far as production goes. We've worked really a lot of that. Just been real methodical with it, just taking our time with it, working it a lot, and having pretty good success for the most part. Fishing the majors and minors mainly. The minors were pretty good for us. The in-between bite between the major or minor, whichever one you got to fish, the major was pretty good as well. But you could tell that little drop off once that bite frame kind of died out. So you had to kind of change your tactics up just a hair. So we threw a lot of bigger baits. We were throwing a lot of the original size down south in multiple different flavors: watermelon red, big papa, twisted tea, white ice, bone diamond. Pretty standard colors. Water was pretty clean for the most part, so we tried to incorporate some more translucent baits that were in there. In the knock and tail, the greenback, and the heavy metal did pretty well for us as well. There's a one that's got a little bit more purplish to it. It's almost morning glory, but that's not the name of their particular bait that they have on it, but that's the flavor that it is. And of course, we threw a lot of pav lures in the 5 and 6 inch, the rat tail that they have, and did pretty well with those. Working with a 16th ounce jig head, just pushing that grass, threw some topwater bait in there as well. Had some opportunities with that, with some blow-ups. A lot of opportunities with it. Not a lot of takes with the topwater, but it was really good searcher bait that we can really kind of find where fish were kind of concentrating. So we were throwing plastics in there behind that once we kind of got that figured out, and that's when the production really kind of picked up for us. So that was what our tactics were, especially up in this area here when we were working that. And, of course, the grass was holding a few more redfish than it was holding trout. And all the redfish, one thing that's kind of a rule of thumb for you, once you kind of find a group of them, usually that first or second fish that you catch out there kind of dictates what the whole size of that pod will be on average. That doesn't always hold true. But, if you're catching, 18s to 21s out of there, that's pretty much the size those fish are going to be. Of course, if you're fortunate enough to find something that's got a bigger fish in it than, mid slot to upper slot, that's pretty much what that's going to be. That's going to be in that pod as well. So, we focused on the grass line. We worked the mouths that dump out in some of these back lakes. And a lot of those mouths that jump out into it, they got a lot of shell that's working around. So found a lot of fish, or a good number of fish, in and around that shell. If you haven't fished Sundown, as far as wading it goes, it gets a little mushy in some spots. It's a terrific wintertime spot, especially when you got a right amount of water that works in there. But with this bull tide that we've had in here for the last 10 days, it's worked out pretty well for us. So that was what our focus was. That's what we worked on. And we caught quite a few fish up and down this back shoreline. So if you wade that from the tip where I started this all the way down to where it dumps back out into the ICW, that's a several hour wade if you decide to work that. So probably have to move your boat 3 or 4 times just to keep up with it, because you can get away from it in a hurry. But another thing that you have to kind of be aware of too is the amount of barge traffic that comes back up and down that. It will push and pull water off of that, so something to be aware of. So make sure whenever you put that power pole down and with your boat, just make sure it's stuck really good, because it can get away from you if you're not careful. Again, with the amount of water that we have had in here, so we just kind of worked these outer edges of the St. Joe shoreline pretty close to the shoreline. So a lot of that deeper grass was, it wasn't not accessible, but it was a little bit more difficult because of the amount of water. So you were fishing much deeper water. So it was kind of more of a target area as the morning progressed, because water temps, they're starting out early in the week. Last week they were starting out at 82, 83, and as the week progressed and we got toward the weekend, it started moving up just a little bit. You started finding it in the mid 80s, 85, 86. Of course, with the lower winds and is not as much cloud cover, that water temp rises even more as that sun gets on top of it. So, we're seeing some 88s, which wasn't bad, not bad at all. Still very good water temp. But we kind of took advantage of that and we slid back in some of these mouths that dump out of these back lakes, and just kind of worked all this. And we just walked into these areas. Now, with as much water as in here, you could run your boat back in there, especially if you got the right kind of boat. You can get a skinny water boat, and, i.e. a Haney or a Mowdy or Mayak or Simmons or whatever, SCB, any of those boats that run pretty skinny, you can get back into these areas pretty easily and not have to worry too terribly much about it as far as getting hung up somewhere. But we just kind of left the boat out front, just walked back in here, throwing a lot of topwater baits in here to see if there was these pods of fish that were working back in these areas. You had this little bit deeper channel that's back that, so we kind of worked off of these edges here. Found a good number of fish. Like I say, nothing great yet. Once we kind of get our first little cool front, maybe probably, I would say October is probably when our first one's kind of come pushing through, and it drops our water temps into that upper 70s. That's when you'll really start to see a change in how these fish are starting to eat and what they want to do and how aggressive they get. Right now, they're still not super aggressive. You'll come across a few that most of them are pretty light bite. But, we're finding those in and around these areas here, back up in these little cuts back that. Found some fish that are in there, and then, of course, you get back up in these areas and work all this. A lot of wading, a lot of walking areas, so you kind of have to move your boat accordingly to kind of put yourself in an advantage situation back these. But we fished a lot of the shorelines, some out in the middle, a lot of great grass that's back in here. And again, when you have these higher water levels that come in here with these big bull tides, or if you have a storm that's pushing water up in these, take advantage of that, man, because these fish will push back into these types of areas, and you can get into areas that you typically have not been able to fish for several weeks. So it's a whole new area for these fish, and they like to get back in those. So you can typically find some pretty good spots where some fish are holding. Maybe not all over these back lakes, but they'll be in a little area that will hold some fish pretty well. So that was kind of our game plan. So when we fished these back areas around here, then, you come back out here and came all the way back down toward the Mott, fished all this outside. There's some scattered shell, a little bit better hard-packed sand that's back down in this area here, all the way back in that. And, of course, you get back into sand and Fence Lake back in these areas here. It opens up for you pretty well. And these are all accessible through the back lakes. You don't even have to come out if you don't want to. You can stay out in the inside back there as long as you know where you're running. So just be careful of that. If you haven't run that back there, just take your time with it. But again, always be aware of what your tides are during that time frame, because that water can drop out in a heartbeat. So it doesn't take a whole lot. You say we're on the backside of that new moon now, So we will be in our transition days here in the next several days. So take that in consideration when you are packing your box to wade this, and make sure that you change your profile size and you're working all that with different profiles, and just kind of play with it and see what the fish are still wanting. Like I say, we threw a lot of bigger baits this past week just because of the new moon phase, and it was, for the most part, very productive for us. Down here in Italian Bend area, again with a lot of extra water that's in our system right now. These back shorelines here in Italian Bend typically light up pretty well. So you've got a few back lakes that dump out in there, and of course it pushes water back into those back lakes as well. And you got a lot of good grass down here in Italian Bend. If you fish it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We found a lot of scattered fish over it. Nothing really concentrated as far as redfish go. Trout were pretty, they were scarce back in here. Catch one here, catch one there, but not a big number. But they seemed to be just a tad bit better, the trout-wise anyway, back in these areas back here in the Italian Bend spots and these little lakes that dump back out in here. We kind of focused on those mouths and the little swampy areas that go back in there. You'll find a bunch of duck blinds that are back in there. But again, with the extra water, those areas kind of light up. Now, if you try to wade back into those, just be prepared. It's very mushy. It's back in some of those areas. So if you got a kayak that you may want to dump off the road that goes back up into Cape Valero area, or even Mothership, a kayak, man, you can kayak it all day long back in there. It's not a problem at all. And you'll find some redfish tailing back in there. Saw a few of the Poland skiff guides that were back in there just kind of working the shorelines and trying to get their people on, maybe some opportunities for that. But like I say, the trout that we found seemed to be around more the 16 to 18 mark, which is a little bit better quality fish. They're still not super thick. There's still some of these trout that are either A, still waiting to drop eggs, or B, they've already dropped early in the spring, and water temps are still dictating that as well. Like I say, we just work these areas here, way out here on the point. Decent little reef that's out there. I say a reef, it's a little bit more hard packed and shell that's out there on that part. Then we kind of worked our way back up and then got back in here to Pete's Bend and worked back off in this little area back in here, worked this whole back shoreline. You got some more back lake mouths. They're smaller. They don't go very far back, but they're a great location for fish to hold and want to stack up in there. So, say we pull a fish out here or there, and some of them, not all. Then we got up here on the back shoreline where the old Redfish Lodge used to be, that peninsula right there, and where that pier, it's a broken down pier there, and just kind of worked all that in and around that, and then come back here on the front side. Like I say, our winds were super light all week, so it made fishing pretty easy as far as that. Of course, you got really good grass. It's on the front half of Rattlesnake, i.e. Redfish Lodge area, all the way up there to Copano Ridge. Just working all that, a little bit better grass. It's in there, satellite grass scattered there. So, and we found fish scattered out amongst all that. Bait fish is not a problem whatsoever. Still tons of bait in the area. Like I say, the baits that we primarily were using in the down south, we stayed with the original size, the supermodels, threw some of the big smooth in assorted different colors, some of the ones I had mentioned earlier. The Pav lures as well. It's become if you haven't used the Pav lures much, pick you up a bag or so at either Tackletown or Waterloo up there in Victoria, or you can go online and order those as well. That's going to be a bait that you're going to probably want to have in your box as we get toward end of November, get into December, the first of the year. It's a terrific little bait. Works really well. Got a great assortment of colors that are in there, so check those out if you have not used those. And then they have baits that are very similar to what the Fat Boys and the Soft Dines are, as well as just a whole different look to those, but they're very similar on how they work. And then, of course, in the knock and tail lures, the two I mentioned earlier, the greenbacks and the heavy metal, did really well for us. Sprinkled in some of the Mirror Lure Little Johns and the Little John XLs in the Truth, Watermelon Red, primarily, at least for myself and some of the people that fished with me this past week. Those are the main ones that we were fishing. And so, work these areas really well. Take your time with them. You're going to catch fish. It's in there. It may not be the amount or the size that you're looking for. There are fish that are holding in that. And again, as we continue to look at our weather pattern in the upcoming week, everything still looks to be pretty great. So at some point, this water will begin to drop back out, but it's for right now. Make sure that you can take advantage of those higher water situations.